Well, good morning and welcome to the IISS US. My name is Bryce Campbell. I'm the Managing Director of our office here. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome our colleague from our London office, Rahul Roy-Chaudhury, here in the United States for the first time in nearly a decade. So this is something like a lunar eclipse or something that's a rare occasion that you are treated to, and hopefully will not be another 9 years before he's back. But Rahul is here to talk about the nearly first year of Prime Minister Modi's time in office in Delhi, and it's, I think, fitting to be in a town that knows a thing or two about high expectations for new leadership upon assuming office, with an ambitious agenda, sky-high expectations, I think, globally. I don't know if the Prime Minister is scheduled to receive a Nobel Peace Prize too early or anything along those lines, but I think we're all very interested to hear your thoughts on how things have gone in the first year with the new Prime Minister, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions from the audience as well. So the format this morning, Rahul will have about 30 minutes to present his thoughts, and then we'll turn it over to the floor for questions. And we look forward to hearing from you then. But with that, I will get out of the way and turn the floor over to Rahul.
Thank you very much, Bryce. It's great to be in Washington after 9 years, surprising. And I hope that I'm not back in Washington after another 9 years. But thanks to Bryce's enthusiasm and encouragement, I'm here today. And I look forward to the next few minutes of discussion and the next few days in the US as well. What I will be speaking on in the next for the next half an hour is India's neighborhood policy in the first year of the Modi government. And let me begin with two caveats. The first is that it's not yet a full year since Narendra Modi has been Prime Minister of India. It's just about 10.5 months. But the title seems much better to say it's a year rather than the first 10.5 months of the Modi government. The second caveat is that I would like to focus on three aspects of his neighborhood policy: the Pakistan-Afghanistan region, China, and the Indian Ocean. There are other aspects, and I'm happy to discuss them in the Q&A session, but I thought it would be useful for all of us just to concentrate on these three issues. Why is the neighborhood important for the Prime Minister? My sense is that far more than any other previous government, Modi's government is acutely aware of the direct, deep, and enduring linkages between his domestic agenda priorities and its foreign policy enablers. If Modi's objective is, as I believe it to be, the economic development and the political transformation of India, encompassing high economic growth and the boosting of foreign investment, this essentially requires a stable, secure, and peaceful neighborhood. Modi, therefore, issued an unprecedented invitation to the heads of the SAARC group, the South Asia Association for Regional Cooperation, to attend his inauguration, as well as Mauritius. This took place on the 26th of May in Delhi last year. Modi's first foreign visit was to Bhutan, followed shortly afterwards by a visit to Nepal, which was surprisingly, in the Indian context, the first visit by any Indian Prime Minister to Nepal in nearly 2 decades. Last month, Modi undertook a 5-day visit to 3 Indian Ocean island states: Seychelles, Mauritius, and Sri Lanka. Shockingly, again, for any Indian Prime Minister, this was the first bilateral prime ministerial visit from India to Sri Lanka in nearly 3 decades. Yet, India's attempts at regional stability will be difficult, with relationships with its immediate neighbors traditionally dominated by mistrust, disputes, and tensions amidst a precariously evolving regional security environment. Nonetheless, I believe Modi's premiership provides a unique opportunity for attempts to significantly change India's neighborhood policy and help stabilize the region. And I say this for three reasons. First, this is the first time in 30 years that India has a prime minister who actually wanted to become prime minister. And the reason I say this is that we've had in the past accidental prime ministers, we've had prime ministers who've been the lowest common denominator of coalition politics, but very clearly in the Modi campaign in the last election, which was really a presidential style campaign in the world's largest parliamentary democracy, we see that Modi had very clearly his sights on the prime ministership. It is therefore Modi's personality and character that will define India's neighborhood and foreign policy in the next 4 and a bit years. Secondly, Modi won a decisive electoral mandate in the lower house of parliament, the Lok Sabha. This is the first time that any single political party in India enjoys a majority in this house in 30 years. This not only ensures political stability in the central government for a full 5-year term, but the absence of dependence on parliamentary allies for political survival also make for a stronger and bolder foreign policy for India. Thirdly, with Modi's strong nationalist credentials, it will be difficult for any conservative right-wing organization or group to attempt to scuttle any diplomatic compromise Modi may agree to. Now to the neighborhood. Firstly, the Pakistan-Afghanistan region is, I believe, for Modi, his top security challenge. It is often forgotten that on his premiership, Modi inherited rather than forged the current tensions in relations with Pakistan. This is marked by the absence of any official India-Pakistan dialogue for the last 2 years as a result of the rise in Pakistani firing across the line of control dividing Kashmir. Yet Modi's meeting with Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif at his swearing-in ceremony in Delhi led to the setting up of a meeting between their foreign secretaries in an attempt to resume this stalled dialogue. Last month, India's Foreign Secretary visited Islamabad on a SAARC journey, marking India's first official diplomatic outreach to Pakistan in over 2 years. The BJP as a party has also recently entered into a coalition government in Kashmir, whose common minimum program seeks the normalization of relations with Pakistan. Yet the reality is that India-Pakistan relations are currently dominated by deep tensions and mutual mistrust. The official bilateral dialogue has not resumed, trade relations suffer, and there was a distinct chill between Modi and Sharif at the SAARC summit in Kathmandu last November. Indeed, the Modi government's position towards Pakistan has hardened in 3 significant ways, but with mixed results. Firstly, India last August formally protested against the meeting between the Pakistan High Commissioner in Delhi and the separatist Kashmiri Hurriyat group leadership in Delhi, and abruptly cancelled the scheduled Foreign Secretary level talks. Yet Pakistan continues to deal with the Hurriyat leadership. Secondly, India has deliberately intensified and reacted forcefully to firing and violence across the LOC and the international border in response to Pakistan. India's defense minister has warned Pakistan that it will make the cost to Pakistan unaffordable. Troops and civilians have been killed on both sides of the LOC, with both sides blaming each other for the ceasefire violations. Third, the Modi government has expressed zero tolerance towards terrorism, and last month India's Home Minister publicly criticized Pakistan for supporting terrorism in India. Yet India has not been successful in pressurizing Pakistan on critical issues in response to the Mumbai terror attack in November 2008, carried out by the Pakistan-based militant group Lashkar-e-Taiba with links to Pakistan's security establishment. The most visible of these is the attempt to bring to justice the perpetrators of the Mumbai terror attacks. This faced a huge setback last week with the grant of bail from a Pakistani jail of the alleged mastermind of the Mumbai terror attacks, the operations chief of LET, Zakir Mehman Lakhvi. It is also notable that 3 days before Modi's swearing in ceremony, there was a failed terror attack by the Lashkar-e-Taiba on the Indian consulate in Herat in Afghanistan. This would have had serious implications for regional security had it succeeded. Notwithstanding the brutal terror attack on a school in Pakistan last December, killing 132 children and 15 others, and Pakistan's vow to counter terrorism, this is unlikely to include anti-India militants based in Pakistan, such as the Lashkar-e-Taiba or the Jaish-e-Mohammed, as they have so far not taken up arms against the Pakistan state. In the absence, therefore, of any effective disruption of Pakistan-based anti-India militant groups, India's primary concern vis-a-vis Pakistan, and this is Prime Minister Modi's primary concern vis-a-vis Pakistan, is the possibility of another Mumbai-type terror attack on India. How will Modi's government then respond to such a terror attack? Will it be restrained, as the Manmohan Singh government was after the 2008 Mumbai terror attack, or will the Modi government threaten or respond with military force? Would this be in the form of the Indian military's proactive response? Could this then lead to Pakistan's first use of battlefield nuclear weapons deployed on the front line, despite the absence of any existential threat to Pakistan? Will this in turn bring about an Indian massive retaliation with nuclear weapons against Pakistan, as required by India's official nuclear doctrine, despite the possibility of a Pakistani use of nuclear weapons on its own territory? These dangers are exacerbated by the prospective misperceptions, misunderstanding, and lack of communication that tend to exist between the two sides during a time of crisis. Nonetheless, after over a decade, an Indian Prime Minister is scheduled to visit Pakistan late next year for the next SAARC summit. Modi will, as according to plans currently, is expected to travel to Pakistan next November 2016. This could provide an opportunity for Modi to attempt a significant change in relations with Pakistan, somewhat in the manner of his BJP Prime Minister's predecessor Atal Bihari Vajpayee, when Vajpayee went to a SAARC summit in Islamabad in January 2004. But I believe this will still fundamentally require Pakistan to crack down on anti-India militant groups. It will also require, I believe, and this is, I suppose, this is still a view I hold, but which needs to be tested. I believe this will still require India to seek informally to influence the most powerful institution in Pakistan, which is the Pakistan Army. But India has refused to engage with the Pakistani Army for all these years because of its anti-Indian stance. This then brings us briefly to Afghanistan as a key dimension and theatre of India-Pakistan relations. Both India and Pakistan have had a history of competing for influence in Afghanistan, which they accuse the other of but deny themselves. India has blamed Pakistan's intelligence agency for involvement in the two terror attacks on its embassy in Kabul in 2008 and 2009, which the Pakistan government has denied. The Pakistan government, meanwhile, has alleged India's involvement through Afghanistan in the support of militant groups in the tribal areas bordering Afghanistan as well as in Balochistan, which India has denied. Over the past near decade and a half, India had intensified its relations with the then Karzai government of Afghanistan, providing $2 billion in aid, training Afghan security forces in India, and provisionally seeking to provide defense supplies to the Karzai government. But the new Afghan President Ashraf Ghani has made it clear his top priority is an outreach to Pakistan, to seek its influence in bringing the Afghan Taliban to the table for peace talks. This has led, in effect, to currently strained relations between India and Afghanistan, with Ghani yet to visit India and Afghanistan's deliberately much publicized suspension of its arms request to India. While the Modi government is clearly concerned over these developments, fearing the re-emergence of dominant Pakistani influence over Afghanistan to the detriment of India, yet it appears quietly confident that peace talks with the Afghan Taliban will not succeed, and the Afghan Taliban will not become part of a new coalition government in Kabul. Currently, therefore, the Modi government appears to be playing a waiting game in Afghanistan, not seeking to push the Ghani government in any way, and at the same time not attempting to disrupt in any way the prospect of talks or the reconciliation process. But the key concern for the Modi government in relation to Afghanistan will be the possibility of greater Pakistani influence in Afghanistan through the Afghan Taliban, which may result in increased threat of terrorism in India. If such a situation develops, what could or would the Modi government do which would be different possibly from the past? It's not clear. Let's briefly shift to China, Modi's top foreign policy challenge. China is India's largest and most powerful neighbor, with an economy 4.5 times larger and a defense budget estimated to be nearly 3 times bigger. India fought and lost a border conflict with China 50 years ago, and this remains a highly emotive issue in India today. Excuse me. China's assertiveness towards the border dispute with India and the expansion of Chinese influence in India's neighborhood are India's top 2 concerns vis-à-vis China. The 2 most populous countries in the world, the 2 largest emerging powers in Asia, still do not agree on the length of their border. This is due to the border dispute that has taken place over the last few decades. The border is called the line of actual control. India places the line of actual control at about 4,000 kilometers. China sees this as about 2,000 kilometers. There have been border cooperation agreements between the 2 which have been signed since 1993. There have been 18 rounds of special representative talks between the 2, but there has been no tangible progress in the border dispute resolution. For India, it sees the border dispute with China in terms of 2 sectors, the western sector and the eastern sector, but for China, it sees the border dispute focusing on the eastern sector, which is the province of Arunachal Pradesh, and not the western sector, which is the southern Tibet, Aksai Chin area. In his electoral campaign, Modi talked tough on China. He criticized its mindset of expansion, and in an unprecedented manner, Tibet's Prime Minister in exile found himself in the official photograph of Modi's swearing-in ceremony along with the SAARC leaders. This would never happen with any previous government in Delhi. Perhaps this took place at the behest of the influential right-wing Hindu organization, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, tough on territorial issues vis-à-vis China in view of the presence of Hindu religious sites in Tibet. China has also officially protested Modi's recent visit to the Indian province of Arunachal Pradesh, which it claims as Chinese territory. Although the last fatal casualty on the Sino-Indian border took place 40 years ago, major border intrusions have taken place twice in the last 2 years. On both these occasions, unlike in the past, Chinese troops entrenched themselves for several days in sizable numbers on the Indian side of the line of actual control. But the response from the Indian government was very different. In 2013, with the then Congress government in power, when this intrusion took place, the initial attempt of the government was to downplay its significance. The foreign minister, particularly the external affairs minister of India, particularly took a strong view, saying it did not matter very much. But it was only after several media reports that the importance of this incursion was understood, and Delhi started taking a tough position. In contrast, when the next incursion took place with Modi as the Prime Minister, the response was very different. This incursion took place surprisingly during the visit of the Chinese President Xi Jinping to India. And Modi's response was to handle it in a robust manner by raising this issue with the President of China himself while he was a visitor in India. This contrasting perspective is important, I think, in a way that we need to understand how India will possibly be looking at its policy towards China on the border dispute issues. We'll know more about this when Modi's first visit to Beijing takes place, which is expected next month. Although the likelihood of a conflict between the two countries is extremely low, the possibility of local transgressions or major intrusions exists. In the absence of effective communication mechanisms and the prevalence of misperception and miscalculation between the two, these could escalate to border standoffs, thereby raising bilateral tensions. At the same time, the issues of Tibet and Tibetans will rise in profile, exacerbated by the dispute over the reincarnation of the present 14th Dalai Lama, nominated by the Chinese government or by the Tibetans themselves, or as the Dalai Lama himself has stated, that it may well be the end of the Dalai Lama's line of succession. Moreover, India remains concerned over the expansion of China's trade and defense relations in its immediate neighborhood, including Pakistan, Myanmar, Nepal, and the island states of the Indian Ocean, which it sees as encirclement by China. This brings me finally to Modi's third neighborhood priority, the Indian Ocean. Sorry. This brings me finally to Modi's third neighborhood priority, the Indian Ocean, as a major test of India's leadership. Unlike the rhetoric of the past, the Modi government truly believes the Indian Ocean as India's immediate and extended neighborhood, vital for its security and for which India must assume a degree of responsibility in shaping its future. Modi's four-pronged vision for the region was unveiled during his visit to Mauritius last month. This focuses on defending India's maritime territory and interests, deepening economic and security cooperation with maritime neighbors and island states, promoting collective action for peace and security, and seeking a more integrated and cooperative future for the Indian Ocean. This four-pronged policy appears to be driven by three factors. First, to counter China's expanding influence in the Indian Ocean. This was most vividly seen by the presence of Chinese submarines off Sri Lanka last year. China has also proposed a maritime Silk Road plan intended to revive a trade route running from China through Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean to Europe. A key contract for the expansion of Malé International Airport in the Maldives was granted to a Chinese company recently after the controversial cancellation of its Indian contract 3 years ago. To counter China's maritime Silk Road plan, the Modi government has recently launched Project Mosam, a transnational initiative to revive India's ancient maritime trade routes and cultural linkages with countries in the region. And the new Sri Lankan government has suspended the contract given to a Chinese company on the Colombo Port City project, reportedly at India's behest. Secondly, to build and expand India's security links with island states to ensure India's role as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean. Modi's visit to the Seychelles, Mauritius, and Sri Lanka last month aptly demonstrated this. This included the gifting of a second Dornier maritime aircraft and the launching of a coastal surveillance radar project in Seychelles and the provision of an offshore patrol vessel to Mauritius. Alongside, India agreed for the first time to develop Assumption Island in Mauritius and Agalega Island in the Seychelles, both of which could be used for surveillance purposes by India. India also agreed to the politically significant development of the oil tank farm near Trincomalee in eastern Sri Lanka. The third reason for India's four-pronged policy, Modi's four-pronged policy towards the Indian Ocean, is, I believe, an attempt to maintain maritime dominance over the Indian Ocean. India is currently bolstering its naval profile with the acquisition of aircraft carriers and nuclear-armed ballistic missile submarines. The government recently unveiled an $8 billion naval building plan. The first of 6 French Scorpion submarines have just begun sea trials in an attempt to stabilize the Navy's dwindling force levels for submarines. Plans are being made to accelerate the construction of India's second indigenously designed and built aircraft carrier after the first, which is expected to enter service in 4 years. Yet, none of these 3 objectives of countering China, of being seen as a net security provider for the Indian Ocean island states, or in terms of attempting maritime dominance over the Indian Ocean, can be met by Modi without a clear demonstration of Indian leadership as well as a build-up of requisite resources and capacities. Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean is considerable, and China has deep pockets. India has only recently begun to build security relationships with island states, and the Indian Navy's force levels and reach are still not sufficient for a dominant role in the Indian Ocean. Indian leadership requires, therefore, a demonstration of commitment and sustenance of a responsible role in the safety, security, and stability of the Indian Ocean. A stronger regional grouping for the Indian Ocean is required, in which India could play a key role. This also requires extensive and durable cooperation with friendly regional and extra-regional navies in the Indian Ocean. But could India once again take part in a quadrilateral naval exercise along with the US, Japan, and Australia, as it did 8 years ago, only to have ended an attempt at this sort of a naval relationship after a stiff démarche from China? Could the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium and the 16-nation Milan Series naval exercises also be strengthened? Significantly, during President Obama's visit to India 3 months ago, both sides unveiled an 11-paragraph US-India joint strategic vision for the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean region. A key paragraph affirmed the importance of safeguarding maritime security and ensuring freedom of navigation and overflight throughout the region, especially in the South China Sea. This reference to the South China Sea, perceived to refer indirectly to China, is widely interpreted as an emerging India-US consensus on countering an assertive China. While one should not exaggerate its impact, it does indicate a long overdue recognition of the complementary nature of India's new Act East policy and the US rebalance towards the Asia-Pacific. This also provides opportunities for expanding the Malabar series of India-US bilateral naval exercises and by regularizing the participation of Japan, as well as elevating the trilateral dialogue with Japan to a ministerial level. To conclude, for me, having looked at the Modi government foreign and security policy perspective for the last 10.5 months, it is clear that the single priority for Modi's government is going to be, and has been so far, its immediate neighborhood. But this provides tremendous challenges, as I've just mentioned, to ensure that this neighborhood does become stable and secure. In this respect, Prime Minister Modi has a unique role to, if he wishes it, to dramatically attempt to change the nature of India's relationship with the neighborhood in order to ensure that the basic rationale for his government of the economic and political transformation of India takes place. This is unlikely to take place without a stable, secure, and peaceful immediate neighborhood. Thank you.
Rahul, thank you very much for that. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions from the audience. One quick follow-up I had You touched on the end the importance of cooperation with the United States and Japan, for example. I wonder if you could speak more directly to the importance of India's external partners, bilaterally, multilaterally, in making this neighborhood policy successful, and what challenges you see to making that an optimal outcome in terms of India's goals. What do they need from the United States, Japan, Australia, in dealing with thorny situations in Afghanistan with China, for example?
In a way, if you look at the three key areas of the neighborhood, with Pakistan, for India, it's very clear what it hopes the U.S. government is able to do, which is to try to influence Pakistan on some of these issues. But it's not an easy task. It's unlikely.
We've been so good at it.
It's unlikely to take place. So I think there's a realistic view in Delhi on the limits on this issue. On China, I think what we're seeing is, I think, particularly significant, that I believe there is a shift taking place in the Modi government's view of how to deal with China. I think it'd be inconceivable for any earlier government to have, in a joint statement with the US, provided a reference, an indirect reference to China by bringing in the South China Sea. I think this is one aspect of it. Also, I think it's inconceivable that in any previous government or swearing-in ceremony, you would have the Tibetan Prime Minister in exile as the official photograph clearly. So there is a very clear shift in this, where the message, I think, from the Modi government to the US is that it is, unlike past previous governments, it is very keen to build this relationship, but there are limits to how this will take place. But it is an important development, a significant one. If you contrast this to, for example, about 3 years ago, when US Defense Secretary Leo Panetta came to Delhi after a Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, and he talked about Delhi, India being the linchpin of the US and Asia Pacific sort of security and rebalance. The then Defense Minister, Anthony, was petrified as to the implications of this, and his response was that, well, India sees itself as part of a multipolar world, etc. My sense is that any future visiting Defense Secretary, US Defense Secretary to India, is not going to get that sort of response, but is going to get a much more favorable response on this. But at the same time, I think it's important to understand there are limits as to what India could be able or willing to do on this. On the Indian Ocean, to me, I think it's the area which has the most resonance for an India-US partnership. Not only a political one, but a more meaningful security-related partnership. We've seen the joint statement that has come out, the maritime vision that both countries have. In many ways, I don't expect major developments to take place between India and Pakistan and China till the middle of 2016. And I think this is the space between now and 2016 that we could see key developments on the Indian Ocean between India and the US. So to me, the US in all three areas can play a role, but a limited role in some contexts. But I think the Indian Ocean particularly a key role for the future.
Great. All right, well, I'm sure there are lots of questions. Please wait for the microphone, identify yourself, and ask your questions. So we'll start right here in the middle.
Thank you. Well, thank you for a very good and broad and comprehensive presentation. And I must say 9 years is far too long to miss you from Washington. But speaking of missing things, in your talk, which was very good, as I said, the one neighbor of India that never got mentioned was Bangladesh. And I have been quite mystified now since the beginning of the Modi government about what its policy is towards Bangladesh. We know that Congress was an enabler to what happened there a year and a half ago, which has created because of both parties' total intransigence, a very unstable situation. India really has a potentially growing unstable country on its eastern border. Now, things have changed in the last couple of weeks, and maybe that means there's been a change in India that we don't know about, because it would have been done behind the curtain. But I'm wondering if you could enlighten me on what they're thinking about Bangladesh and why they seem to be so passive in the light of the growing instability there. That's the first question. I have one on Pakistan too, but I'll wait and do that later.
Sure. No, I think you're right. I mean, as a former U.S. ambassador to Bangladesh, I think you're justifiably sort of focused on this, and it's important to raise Bangladesh clearly. My sense is that a few years ago, as you remember, Ambassador, the Congress government was very keen to really provide a strategic sort of substantive outreach to Bangladesh. Sheikh Hasina, as Prime Minister, came to Delhi. Delhi was working on issues on counterterrorism and counter-extremism. But that outreach failed because of the inability of the Prime Minister then to get Mamata Banerjee on board for the Teesta Water Accord. This government, I think, again sees Bangladesh as an opportunity that it needs to have an outreach in terms of its diplomatic and security perspectives. It sees counter-extremism and counter-terrorism as key components of such an outreach. But there still is this one issue about the Teesta water issue. I mean, I believe that the parliamentary move forward on the exchange of enclaves will ultimately take place, and that's going forward. There is a certain amount of cooperation, counter-terrorism. But on the Teesta water issue, my sense is that the BJP has not, and it's very clearly, has not been able to carry out an outreach to Mamata Banerjee. She's been one of the severest critics of the BJP government. My sense is that the BJP government is waiting for the next provincial elections in West Bengal. It hopes to win those elections. It hopes to have a BJP chief minister in West Bengal, and that is when I suspect that you will see the momentum in the India-Bangladesh relationship. But at the moment, it doesn't seem to be any ability or interest in the Indian side to pursue this in any significant way, which is a pity. But I think there's a timeline on this.
When is the West Bengal election?
It's going to be at the end of next year, towards the end of next year. I think that's the time. So it's about 10, 12 months, just a bit more than that, yes.
Great. And here in the second row.
So
Oh, so you can just wait for the microphone, please.
Surjit Man Singh, American University. Rahul, you didn't spend too much time on Pakistan, but it seems to many people that the Modi government is swinging from one end of the pendulum to the other end of the pendulum and hasn't really consolidated or articulated any sustainable policy towards Pakistan. Could you elaborate on that and what you think its policy would be? I mean, the previous government went in for peace at any price. And I don't know if the right-wing BJP will tolerate that kind of attitude.
Thank you, Professor Mansingh. My sense is that there is a sort of instinctiveness which has been the case for many Indian prime ministers in relation to Pakistan, and I think Modi is no exception to this. And for Modi, the instinctiveness on this was to see if there could be an outreach to Pakistan very early on in his administration, in his government, and we had the outreach and the invitation to Nawaz Sharif as a member of the SARC heads of government to come into to India. So I think that the basic sort of sense I get is that Prime Minister Modi is keen for this outreach in order to have the stability in the region that he knows is essential and to ensure the transformation that he wants for India. But once this took place, as you know, when Nawaz Sharif went back to Islamabad, there was a lot of criticism over his visit to India. There was again the line of control, the firings the space in firings across and violence across the line of control again took place soon after that. So in a way, what we've seen is that the instinctiveness, the initial sort of view of trying to bring in Pakistan, that still continues in terms of the outreach, but actually a reality that the relationship with Pakistan is going to be a difficult one. I don't see any enthusiasm on the Indian side to restart the official bilateral dialogue between the two countries. Modi's made it very clear that he will not accept the violence across the line of control or terror attacks in India and Kashmir, particularly in that sense. So, in a way, the question now is how effectively can the Modi government manage the relationship with Pakistan? I believe in the absence of any movement forward on talks. Till I think when we come into a phase in mid-2016, where the Modi government expects to be more fully empowered in two ways. One, it hopes by then to have won sufficient Rajya Sabha seats through winning state elections in India to have a majority in the Rajya Sabha, which it doesn't have at the moment. And secondly, at the moment, it actually has control of only 9 or 10 of 26 provincial governments, but by mid-2016, it could have the control of a majority of provincial governments again through winning state elections. My sense is that actually the mid-2016 towards the end of 2016 period could be where the opportunities are there, where the Prime Minister would be more powerful politically within India, where the ability to provide the substantive outreach could well be there. But as I said, on the basis that Pakistan needs to do more to curb anti-India militant activity based in Pakistan. There is no easy option on this. This government has adopted, I think, a tougher line on Pakistan clearly than the previous government. But at the same time, I think this government does feel that there needs to be the management of the relationship, which is critical.
Back here in the second row.
Thank you very much. Michael Yehuda from GW. I'd like to ask you to elaborate further on how the Modi government looks on the relationship with China. Clearly, under the Modi government, the economic relationship with China has continued to increase. I don't know offhand whether whether it's India's most important economic partner, but it's very close. Also, there's the Chinese interest in developing infrastructure in India, and the Indian government seems to favor that as well. And at the same time, there's a rivalry between the two that you mentioned. Now, clearly, if you were to look at it from a Chinese point of view, they would think that they are in a superior position. It is they who can decide whether they want to put pressure up on the high mountains near the lines of actual control. They, as you said, their navy is stronger now, and as a recent American naval report showed, the growth of the Chinese Navy is continuing at a fast pace. So if India is going to try and establish some kind of preeminence, if you like, in the Indian Ocean, it will face a fairly determined opponent, China. So it's a very difficult balancing act. And I'm not at all persuaded that it's necessarily going to end up in India's favor. One argument would be that India would become more dependent on the United States, perhaps, on the military side, maybe even in terms of infrastructure, the United States and Japan and so on. But wouldn't that cut across the Modi government and indeed Congress government before it? There's fierce pride in India's independence and its position as a major power in its own right, rather than placing itself in some kind of subordinate position.
No, thank you for that. I think just to sort of start by where you ended, I think the issue of strategic autonomy for the Modi government is key, it's critical, there's no question of it. What we're not going to hear is, I think, the term non-alignment. I think that's over. That's not what the Modi government believes in. And it's interesting that in the last 10.5 months, there's no official document that talks about non-alignment. But strategic autonomy is key. But at the same time, there is, I think, a much more sophisticated understanding of the Modi government in terms of the relationships with other countries, including the US on the Indian Ocean, for example. And the joint vision statement that came out, as I said, is key in that, where you have a reference, an indirect reference to China, but done I think with a fair amount of political sort of comfort level on this. So I don't think that we are going to see at the moment a position where the Modi government is going to be dependent on the Indian Ocean, on other countries. What it is keen on is it also knows its strengths, but it also knows its weaknesses. And the weaknesses are that India has the potential, but doesn't have the capabilities in the Indian Ocean. So if it wants to assume a dominant maritime role in the region, then it needs to work effectively with other countries. Modi significantly has called for a much stronger regional grouping in the Indian Ocean, which is a reference to the Indian Ocean Rim Association, which India for years neglected. It's only now recently that there's much more enthusiasm about the IORA. But these are the sort of these are sort of the institutions which I think we are going to see a much more active Indian role, where India will assume to play an important role in terms of being a responsible player in the Indian Ocean by having a grouping of this Indian Ocean Rim Association, where it takes on a dominant or a leading position in that sense. So it seems to me very clear that there are no the message coming out from the Modi government of China is clear. Is that yes, that India wants a peace and tranquility, line of actual control. It doesn't want, of course, another conflict with China, clearly. But at the same time, there are strengths that India has. And India, I think, the Modi government is able to leverage those strengths, or is able to be willing to leverage those strengths. And coming back to the first part of your question, in terms of the Chinese interest in the Indian Ocean, the Chinese Navy traditionally has not had the reach to traverse the Indian Ocean. We've seen two areas where in the last few years the Chinese Navy and Chinese ships have been active in the Indian Ocean. The first is the increasing dependence on oil. So you had much larger number of Chinese flagged ships in the Indian Ocean. You also had the anti-piracy operation of Somalia, where the Chinese have sent a naval ship or two for the last several years. But they are also aware, as India is, of its own limitations. The Chinese, I think, are even more aware of their own limitations in the Indian Ocean. And the big difference between India and China in the Indian Ocean is that India is physically based there. I mean, it has a presence there, not only in terms of the island states in the Bay of Bengal towards the Malacca Straits, but also in terms of the Arabian Sea. So if you're looking at the one area where India actually, I believe, does have relative advantage over the Chinese military machine, It is in terms of the Navy in the Indian Ocean, not so much the South China Sea. And I'm very clear that there are views that we should be talking about Indian Ocean and the Asia Pacific as an Indo-Pacific region. I'm not so sure we should be talking about that, because that broadens the mandate and provides India possibly an opportunity, but in an area where it's going to be much weaker in the South China Sea. India's strength is traditionally the Indian Ocean. This is traditionally the Chinese weakness. So my sense is that this government actually is well aware of that and is able and willing to leverage its relative strength, which is why China is very keen to look for or to develop ports in the region. It's very keen to ensure that its own linkages with Indian Ocean island states or with Pakistan or with Myanmar, Sri Lanka, etc., on a maritime infrastructure basis is built. These are areas where we are actually going to see, I think, a great game of sorts being played out between India and China in the Indian Ocean. But I believe, at the moment at least, definitely in India's favor, but it depends on how the Modi government is able to leverage its own strength. And you can only know this if the government is aware of India's own weaknesses in the Indian Ocean firstly.
I think that would be a great topic for a book. You should write something on the Indian Navy.
Well, actually, Bryce, now that you mentioned, I'm writing my third book. I'm writing my third book on the Indian Navy called India's Naval Strategy, which should be it'll come out as a Delphi book, and it should come out later this year. But the reason is that the second book I wrote 12 years ago, and since then there's been a dramatic change in India's perception of the sea, and I think maximized possibly in the last 10.5 months by this government.
Great. Let's take the last two questions quickly, and we'll see if we can get through before too much longer. So let's start in the back and then go to the third row.
Hi, Alex Sanchez. I'm a senior fellow of a small think tank. What do you think are going to be the future relations between India and the Maldives, given the arrest and trial of former President Nasheed? I know that Prime Minister Modi actually cancelled his trip to the Maldives because of the arrest. I heard only a few days ago the former defense minister was sentenced to 10 years. How is Modi going to balance support for its one-time ally with India's strategic interests in the region with regard to the Maldives and China, like you explained before? Thank you.
Great. And let's get the question here in the third row and you can answer them at the same time.
Deepa Olapalli, also from George Washington University. Rahul, to take off from your excellent broad picture that you laid out, I'm wondering whether you could begin to construct a kind of a Modi doctrine for the neighborhood. I know it's very premature. However, just in terms of what that might look like, would it be something where India would see relations in terms of strict reciprocity? Would there be more flexibility? Or would it be calibrated according to country? Okay, that's one question. And very quick one on the Indian Ocean. You talked about building regional architecture, security architecture in the Indian Ocean, and I wonder to what extent, the more it begins to look like, excluding in the regional picture, China, for example, like the Indian Ocean NATO Symposium, which India actively did not want China involved, will that then put these other countries in a difficult position where they have to choose either or, because they all want Chinese economic assistance? Thank you.
Great. So future relationships with the Maldives, is there a Modi doctrine, and then how to balance the desire of local partners to cooperate with both India and China.
On the Maldives, you're absolutely right. Maldives was going to be the fourth country, the Indian Ocean island state, that Modi was going to visit. But because of the arrest and treatment of the former president, Modi cancelled it. The Maldives issue hasn't been a new one for India. As I said in my presentation, that I think some of the problems for India started when the Maldivian government cancelled the Indian airport contract by the Indian company GMR and gave it to a Chinese company. I think it shows It shows what I had said in my presentation. It shows the requirement of India's leadership and sustained commitment to these issues, because even a small country like Maldives does provide potential influence on some of these areas, and it is going to be a challenge for the Indian leadership to move ahead on this. But there are again certain strengths that India has for example, in terms of the previous question, that China doesn't. If you look at the Maldives coastal security network, 26 radars of the Maldives coastal security network is linked to the Indian radar network for coastal surveillance issues. There's a very strong security cooperation mechanism that has taken place between Maldives and India, and so there are already in place certain potentials that India has with the Maldives. Clearly, there's been a setback in the relationship, but I think the key is to see this in a long-term framework, and one where, notwithstanding the greater Chinese influence, arguably, in the Maldives, India has to keep on working with the Maldives government on these issues to ensure that there are mutual interests that are satisfied on both sides. In terms, Deepa, in terms of the question on the Modi doctrine, I think it's my sense is that it's going to, from if we look at what's happened in the last 10.5 months with Pakistan, yes, there's a much more hardline position that the Modi government has. On Afghanistan, interestingly enough, it's much more it's much more realistic in a way, and saying, well, it's up to President Ghani to decide what he wants, and supportive in that sense. With China, again, there's an element of a harder line aspect, though of course China is India's largest trading partner, etc. And the Indian Ocean, there is one of leadership, which is key. So I don't see that that we can put any one sort of adjective to describe Modi's neighborhood policy, which I think is very important and encouraging. Because you can't have one sort of policy, for all of India's neighbor. But if there, and I think there will be a Modi doctrine, which we'll be talking about in the next 2 or 3 years. To me, the three key aspects of such a doctrine, I think, come out to be: firstly, that the focus will be and is the neighborhood, and I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, there is a tremendous sort of change in Delhi as to the importance of the neighborhood. I mean, the visit to Sri Lanka, the first bilateral visit in 30 years, the visit to Nepal, crazy, the visit to Nepal, the first bilateral visit in 2 decades. I mean, and I think that the first element, I think, will be the neighborhood priority. The second, I think, will be that there seems to be a very clear sense that friends of India in the neighborhood will be provided additional support. That India will go out of its way, unlike what is done possibly in the past, to ensure that relationship continues. So Bangladesh, yes, not at the moment, but I think mid-2016 onwards, yes. Nepal, Bhutan, so very clear sense, the friends of India, as India sees these countries, will be supported. The countries that are more difficult for India to deal with, Pakistan particularly, I think there will be a sense that that India will try to work with other countries to the exclusion of Pakistan, possibly in trying to get a regional sort of a stable neighborhood in this. So the second point, I think, is very clear: reward for friends, and a different policy for countries that India is concerned about, including issues on zero tolerance on terrorism. The third aspect of any possible Modi doctrine, I think, is one that I've often talked about in the past, is a sense I see of ruthless pragmatism. I mean, this government, I think Modi government, is pragmatic in many. It knows the strengths for India, but equally important, it knows India's weaknesses. So we're going to have, it's a very pragmatic way that we'll approach these things, but it will be ruthless about this. I think there'll be much more of a transactional relationship on this. As I said, friends will be supported, others will not. There'll be a much greater sort of interest in dealing with leaders of countries where India sees its own interests involved, including other countries outside the region, such as the United States. So to me, these are the three sort of aspects: the neighborhood policy, the focus on a clear link between friends and others, and a ruthless pragmatism that comes out in terms of this government policy. In terms of India and China, I think that India does have a very nascent sort of military cooperation with China. There is an attempt to build maritime cooperation with China. So these things will continue. But I think essentially we are going to see in a much more focused manner by the Modi government an attempt to counter China in areas where it believes it has the strength. I've talked about the Indian Ocean at length, but I think the Tibetan issue is again something which I would flag up. To me, it's remarkable that you would have the Tibetan Prime Minister in exile in the official photograph of the swearing in. I think there's a message in this. And I think Tibet again is something that will be, I think, greater focus with this government. So in a way, yes, there will be areas where China and India can work together, but there will be a much more, what I would call, as I said, a ruthlessly pragmatic way of policy in dealing with countries, including China.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming. I think we've got enough interest here. We could have you back sooner than 9 years.
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming and braving the rain. And please join me in thanking Rahul.